Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Hello and welcome to Sensei Podcast. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, who is Dr. Raja Hatem, who is the Director of CTO and Complex PCI at Sacré-Cœur Hospital in Montreal. So Raja, good morning. Thanks again for being with us today.
Good morning, Manos. It's a tremendous honor for me to be discussing about career and CTO PCI related stuff with you. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Raja, can you give us a little background about yourself? How did you get to this point? Where you train? How was your course for becoming a CTO operator?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting parkour. So I was actually born in Syria, and I moved to Canada when I was 5 years old. I did all my training here, and I grew up here in Montreal in the French system at the Université de Montréal. And I enrolled into cardiology training. And during my cardiology training, I really loved to work with my hands. I fell in love with interventional cardiology. And then when it was about time towards my 5th or 6th year of residency, when I was looking for work for later in life, I fell in love with the team at Sacré-Cœur Hospital. And they really believed in me as well. And they were very supportive. And they felt that the need to train somebody in CTO PCI. And my generation, it was just beginning. So we're talking about 2016, 2017. So the CTO CHIP Fellowship were just starting. The first one who actually did the CTO CHIP Fellowship was Sanjay Kalra, that we all know and love. So he was the first at Columbia University. And I was the second CHIP fellow there. And during my year, there was only 3 programs in that year. There was Rob Riley in Seattle with Bill Lombardi. There was me, who was with Dimitri and Jeff Moses and Ajay with the Columbia team. And then there was another program in Detroit. So it was just bubbling, just starting this whole new concept of training young operators fresh out of training to do very complex stuff was all new. It was a great bet that all you guys, our leaders and our mentors, took and believed in us. And that's when the Sacré-Cœur team felt the need to start a CTO program with our connections with Philippe Généreux, who was a good friend of mine who had trained in New York. I went and did the interviews, and I met Dimitri and Dr. Moses and Dr. Leon and Ajay, and we connected, and they gracefully accepted me into their program. So that's how it all started. It was back in 2016, 2017. I went to New York for a full year. I had done a full year of interventional cardiology, like general interventional cardiology at Sacré-Cœur. And then I went and got the training there with the guys at Columbia. And then I graduated, and then I started a CTO CHIP program in Montreal. So that's a bit of
Wonderful.
my trajectory to get there. It was brand new in those years to have this type and this sort of training.
So this was very well thought of, very well planned, right? From, you are finishing your fellowship, the program wanted to have add this particular skill set to the faculty, and they supported you, I presume, to go there and get extra training. So very well done and very well planned.
Yeah, exactly. And in Canada, the system is a bit different, right? People often forget, but we're about 270 interventional cardiologists for the whole country. I think there are some states in the United States where there's over 500 operators in one state. So it's a very centralized system, and the positions in the university hospitals are very few. So you really have to have a connection with the people who are already there, and you really need to fill a gap or a need to get a university position. And that's how I sort of fell into CTO PCI. It was recommended for me so I could be able to get this job and this position. And at the same time, it was really compatible with my personality and my skill sets. And even though it was very complex, I jumped straight into it, and I hanged my ego at the door arriving in New York, and I was like an open book ready to be filled.
Wonderful. And that's a key part, the willingness to forget what you know. And obviously that's easier when you're early after training versus, after 5 or 10 years in practice. But that was obviously an extra year of training, right? You already done many years of training. Did that bother you taking an extra year, or was it more thought of as an investment?
That's a great question, and it's actually something I often discuss with our residents right now. Cardiology training is long. It's one of the longest trainings that's available in medicine, and especially when you want to do interventional cardiology. Here in Quebec, usually it's 6 years of residency, and then you need to do 2-3 years of fellowship. So it's like a good 8-9 years. But at the same time, it's an investment you do for the rest of your life, right? We're going to have careers that are going to span 30, 40 years, maybe if we're lucky health-wise. So it's a very important decision, and it's a crucial moment, I feel, in a life when you make these kind of decisions. And for me, having the chance to go to New York, to live for a year, to learn from, some of the best operators in the world, I took it straight up. Now, of course, personally, when you're planning these decisions, I had my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, and she was in dentistry, and she was also planning to do a year of residency in general dentistry, and she was going to Hawaii in the year I was in New York. So we had to do long-term distance Hawaii, New York for a full year, which worked out pretty well with FaceTime and phone calls and stuff. But all these decisions, you have to factor in your family life, your personal life, before making them. But for me, it was an opportunity that I just couldn't pass. When you know the people and they're all friends with you, and there are such great mentors and teachers, the people at Columbia University, that taught me that I couldn't pass on that opportunity. And for me, it was an investment in my career. I was going to start something new. And the most important thing, and I think by listening to your podcast, that comes back a lot, I was blessed with having a team at Sacré-Cœur that really believed in me and that wanted to push the limit further. They believed in CTO PCI, they believed in complex revascularization, and that helped me tremendously because I was welcomed with open arms. And my colleagues and my mentors from Sacré-Cœur as well, they didn't see me as a threat, because that's one of the things when I discuss with other CHIP fellows, and we'll get into it. How do you navigate this particular situation that you find yourself to be in, where you're very young, you just came out of training, and now suddenly you're going to do the most complex cases and be selected as the complex guy in an environment where all your colleagues have 15, 20 years sometimes of experience. So I was blessed in my group that this part of it went very well, but it was not easy in the beginning.
And when you started learning, what did you find at New York or before? What did you find the hardest thing to learn in the CTO complex PCI area?
So a funny thing, the first thing, in Canada, we're radial first, right? Like it's been forever. Dr. Campo is one of the leaders and pioneers in radial access. So I would do 90% of my cases radial back in Canada. I get to New York, and I think I started with Dr. Moses in the beginning, and it was bifemoral, 8 French, CTO PCI. So, and we were doing like 2-3 CTOs a day, long case, and then suddenly I went from radial access to sticking 8 French long guide extensions and support guides through the femoral. So that for me was a bit stressing, to be honest, to get perfect femoral access, because we know that if you start your procedure in the wrong way, even you could do the most complex CTO PCI. If you have a femoral complication, it could ruin your whole case. So that for me was a bit of a learning curve to switch from radial to femoral most often. And then, by the end of my year, I slowly became, more friendly and close to Jeff and Dimitri. And by the end of the year, I ended up making them do biradial CTO PCI. And I think, the last portion of my year of training, we were just doing biradial to test the waters and do it like that when the slender sheets came out.
Perfect. And then when it came to the learning part and the planning, are you planning now different than when you finished? Are things evolved, or you still do the same approach? How do you plan your cases?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's interesting here, since I was like the first chip fellow or second chip fellow, the most difficult thing for and Darshan Doshi, Sanjog, Rob Riley, all this little crew when we go have dinner together, it's more how people look at you when you come back. So you have to navigate around these feelings of, oh my God, everybody's watching you, right? Because, in my center, CTO PCI was new. Chip PCI was new. Like, they would do very complex stuff. The Canadian interventional cardiologists in general, like, they're high volume operators. But, CTO PCI retrograde approach, it's a unique beast. So in the beginning, the first few cases, first of all, I was, I had confidence in myself, but, I only had 1 year experience as a fellow. And, as a fellow, you learn, you do cases, but oftentimes, the attending takes the hand, and, you're primary operator for a certain number of cases, but you're secondary operator for a lot. But when you're alone, really alone, and then everybody's looking at you, then it's a different ballgame. It's your name at the end of the paper. So in the beginning, to be honest with you, I was very carefully planning my case selection. So the first thing I did was actually start a CTO clinic, where I would systematically review all cases that were sent to me, even if it was from interventional cardiologists who really believed there was an indication and they thought the case should be done. A lot of the times when I actually met the patient, had conversations about the risks, benefits, when I would look at the angiogram, when I would, estimate my success rate, a lot of the times we ended up taking a different course, switching medication therapy and stuff. And some of the patients actually evolved well. Sometimes there was no ischemia documented. So I was very selective, and I only did the cases that had ischemia documented and that were very symptomatic despite optimal medical therapy. And in Canada, budget-wise and everything, you sort of, they look at you, what you're doing. So you have to be careful to follow guidelines and literature and to be scientific. You cannot just say, oh, this guy's fatigued, he's 300 pounds, he has a CTO of the right, let's get it open. You really scrutinize what you're doing. So I was very careful with my case selection. And to be honest with you, in my first year or 2 years, I would do simpler cases. I didn't start with the epicardial retrograde. Anyways, Dimitri forbade me. He told me, you're not doing no epicardial before you do at least 50 retrograde septals. And I listened to him. He's like a second father for me, Dimitri. So I respected that, and I started really slowly but surely to increase the level of complexity of the types of cases I would do. So in the beginning, I would do antegrade cases, maybe an ADR, and then slowly I remember precisely the date that I did my first retrograde alone, by a septal as an attending. And you have this feeling when you're a young operator, we're like, okay, I'll just jump. I know what to do. I've done this many times. I know all the steps. I know how to manage the complications. And there's this click that happens, and it's for my experience as a young operator being trained, where you just jump and you're like, I can do this. I'm going to do it. And then thankfully for me, it was a success, the first case, because that's the other thing, right? And I think Bill spoke about that on your podcast. If you have a complication or failure, how are you going to react to that? So thankfully for me, my first retrograde went well. I built up some confidence, and I did a second one that went well, a third one that failed, fourth one that failed. Then you learn, and slowly but surely, I planned my cases and I started doing more complex and complex and complex. And now I'm 5 years out, and I actually feel more comfortable. I do epicardials, and it's just, I didn't do it straight away. I really gradually navigated towards complexity. And even though sometimes it meant egotistically wise, saying I don't feel comfortable right now in my first year to tackle a case like this, and how are you going to look in front of your colleagues? You trained in New York with the best of the best, and you can't even do the surgery. But again, I was so blessed to have a very supportive team that I never had this feeling of being inadequate or insufficient. They really let me manage my own growth. to reach the stage where I'm at today, where I really feel comfortable doing pretty much anything.
So the environment was huge, and as you say from the beginning, they were very supportive. Did you take any steps? Did you teach the techs, for example, the nurses, the other teams? How did you create also the environment to help with the case and be success?
That's a great point. One of the things I did, you learn all your life, right? I'm sure you're like one of the ultimate senseis and gurus, but I'm sure you're still learning every day. And one of the things I did when I came back is I got the help from Stéphane Rinfret a lot. He was still in Montreal with us. He's a great mentor for me as a Canadian pioneer in CTO PCI. And actually we'd have, for the more complex cases, I would have Stéphane come over and we'd do the cases together very humbly. And, I learned so much from this guy, and just having him there, just having somebody else to bounce ideas off was very helpful. So that's one thing. Even though I trained in CTO PCI, I continued to be proctored for at least a good 6 months when I came back, just to sort of transition into being alone. Then I think the most important thing is to get your team involved, like you said. Teach the nurses what you're doing. I remember Stéphane taught me that before every CTO PCI, he would sort of have a scrum with the team to explain to them what he was about to do, what were his steps. He would draw the CTO and tell them, this is what we're going to do, or we're going to learn today. And I do that with my team. And the more you get them involved, the more they're motivated, the more they don't mind standing for 4 or 5 hours, and the more they're not like, being, I'm tired of this, what is he doing? Nobody else does that. Why is he doing that? Sometimes if you're not communicative with your team, they could have the impression that we're just sort of crazy cowboys and we're hurting patients and nobody else does that. So why would you do these things and stuff? So I keep the team very involved and implicated in the cases as well.
And you mentioned, Raja, you did a very nice transition, slowly harder cases, get more help. How do you feel now? Do you feel stressed out when you do your cases or any anxiety?
Yeah. Yes. I think if you don't have a fear or a decent amount of anxiety approaching a complex case, you're doing something wrong. Because the worst thing you want to do is be overconfident when you're tackling these cases. Because it's like learning to use very dangerous weapons. I think about mixed martial art professionals. So their hands and their body could be a lethal weapon. If you don't use it properly and you're overconfident, you could kill someone. And I think with CTO PCI and complex procedures, we learn to do so many things, dissecting, all the things we know, the techniques, the tricks, and the tools that we have, that if you don't have a decent level of anxiety before tackling a case, I think it could be dangerous for the patient. So when I have my CTO day, I carefully plan my procedures, well in advance. I make sure that all my equipment has been ordered and is accessible. I make sure that I'm planning for all the potential complications as well. And one of the most important things for me is I make sure the patient really understands what he's getting himself involved into. When I have this backup that I sat down with him, I looked him in the eyes, I told him, this is a risky procedure. It's longer than what we do usually. There's this percentage of complications that might happen. And we have this verbal agreement. For me, psychologically, I'm way more comfortable tackling the case than if he just lands in my room and he's like, okay, go do this, retrograde, the LED, and the patient has no clue what's happening. He was just wheeled in there. So I always have this bit of anxiety, but I try to control all the factors that are in my control. If I feel that I did my absolute best at the end of the case, whether it succeeded or not, or whether I had a complication or not, I sleep well at night.
Okay. And then, Raja, obviously there were many people who want to do this, and you were the one who, was selected and did all this. What do you think made the success to start getting training, but also to be successful down the line?
I mean, it was a tremendous honor to be honest with you. When I look back at the chance that I had and the chance that I still get, like I'm talking with you, you're like one of our heroes in CTO PCI. And it's just, I think being humble helped me a lot. I was raised like that. I come from a Mediterranean background. Um, I think socially, I do well. I love to listen to people. I'm curious about individuals. I'm respectful. And I think all these personality traits helped me be liked by my mentors and my teachers. And I'm a patient person. And when it came time to learn in New York, it was a very different environment, to be honest with you. I mean, in Montreal, where everybody's polite, the Canadians, yes, sorry, please, Canadians are enough for that. You get to New York with Dimitri and Jeff, and it's a different ballgame. It was like a boot camp, a Marine boot camp. So in the beginning, it was a bit, I had never been yelled at in my life, and now it's like, what are you doing? This is not how we do this. But it was sort of a test, I realized, because now, I mean, me and Dimitri and Jeff and Ajay, we're friends. Like they're like my extended family now. But in the beginning, it's like you're so intimidated by them, and you see Dr. Leon, and like you feel like you're in Disneyland when you get over there. But I think what I did right is whenever I would have a complications or I would do something wrong, instead of making excuses and be like, oh, it's not my fault, it's the patient's fault, it's this artery, I was it's my fault, sir, yes, sir, I'm here to learn. And when you have this approach and this attitude, and I try to teach that in my residents now and our fellows, I remember, I think it was Dimitri who told me at the beginning of the year, he's like, you will never impress me technically. You will impress me by your judgment and your character. And he's 100% right, because sometimes, we see residents or fellows, they come in intervention and they want to show us that they're good with their hands. They want to show us that they can wire, but to people like us who have seen complex cases, and especially like you guys, I'm still, young in practice. You can't impress me technically. That's not what we look for. But you will impress me by how you think, your personality, your humility. These are the things that I think helped me get to where I am at today.
Well, if I can add the enthusiasm. Every time, I haven't worked with you clinically. Every time I meet you in meetings, you always seem so excited and enthusiastic that actually it's infectious. Yeah. So I think that that goes a long way there as well.
That's true.
So Raj, what keeps you going right now? What are the things that you're most excited about?
Yeah. So, it's sort of a positive feedback loop. So now that I'm doing, the cases as complex as I did in training, it's sort of, you feel like I just want to do that, and I'm sure you remember that in your first years when you really start to become comfortable with doing any cases. Now I'm at the stage where I'm battling in my hospital to get more CTO days and more lab time and more equipment. So I'm really in that phase of my career where I want to build my volume and my credibility as an operator. Because one of the things that's a bit tricky as well is volume-wise, CTO volume-wise, in Canada and the United States, it's very different. And I'm sure Stefan, talked about that subject. But in Canada, because we're so scrutinized about the case selection, the budgets, the lab time as well, I cannot do 300 CTO PCIs a year. It's impossible. And even when Stefan was here, like he would do 150, and he was like the number one in Canada. So I have to battle between maintaining a very good volume of CTO PCI, complex CTO PCI. I mean, complex PCI in Canada, we do a lot of complex PCI. I mean, this is part of bread and butter. Like everybody does rotablader, everybody does left mains. Like we're so few that you cannot be like, I don't do rota, I don't do left main. Like it's part of the game. So, but the CTO PCI, the retrograde, we're not that many. And now my challenge for me personally is to keep fighting to maintain the volume that I need to still feel comfortable. And then, of course, the other thing that I'm falling in love more and more is explaining in layman's terms what we do, teaching. I love to participate in conferences, giving talks about complications and all that stuff. And I also love everything equipment related, the engineering behind the equipment. It's fantastic. We had the pleasure. You had the kindness to include me in your book to participate, and as every time I plunge back into this area of our field, the engineering of the equipment, I'm fascinated. I mean, people often forget how much work goes into building these devices we use every day. If you look at I'll take a Turnpike or a Corsair, the engineering behind it is amazing. And in Canada, we often have these debates because it's a public system. They have these prices that are extremely low now for equipment. And I find it ridiculous, like that we sell stents for $180 now because it's a public system and they negotiate with the companies. And I feel it's abusive, to be honest with you, because people often forget how much work it took to build that stent or that balloon. And I had the pleasure to go visit manufacturing plants and meet the people who actually build these equipment by hand. And once you see this, and in CTO PCI, we use a lot of equipment. We are throwing wires and micro catheters like it's water. But every time I'm like, man, like this took a long time to build. And one of the things that I'm looking forward in my career is I'm trying to be involved more and more with different partners in the industry to really attend some brainstorming sessions and just discuss with engineers what's coming up in CTO PCI, what are the new tools. I'm excited to use the Triumph that's coming out soon. This gets me excited. I'm like a child and there's a new gadget or a new toy that's coming out. I want to play with it. So these are the things professionally, getting more lab time, participating more and more in teaching and meetings. I love that, and collaborating with you guys. And then more on the industry side, collaborating with engineers for future product development.
And then, Raja, how do you keep yourself in good shape to keep your enthusiasm and your energy, given all the things that you're doing?
Yeah, so that's a very important thing. So first of all, I think balance of professional and personal life is very important. I'm blessed at having a wife that's very active, very sportive. So she keeps me, we go skiing, we go cross-country skiing, and in the summer we do sailing, and we train in the gym in the morning as well. And we go to the gym like from 6 to 6:45 in the morning before going to work. And that is hard in the beginning to wake up early and stuff, but it gives you a discipline. And then it gives you this energy for the rest of your day. And then you come back home and the workout is done. Now, we don't have kids yet. And I'm sure when we'll have kids, all this 6 a.m. will go out the door. But hopefully it will be new challenges. But I think it's very important to keep yourself mentally and physically healthy, especially when you're tackling CTO PCI. And one of the things that I'm a bit sad about is that for now I'm alone in my lab when I do CTO PCI. A lot of my colleagues, they're often 2 operators per case. And in my case, my colleagues are very experienced, but a lot of them don't really understand all the steps, for example, for retrograde and stuff. So I'm often alone with the fellow, but the fellows, sometimes they start, they don't know what's going on. And that I realized recently, I think you were there when I presented this 6-hour case that almost ended up in cardiac arrest. But after that case, after 6 hours of mental energy drainage, I was burnt out. And then I still had to do the rest of my day. I had 2 other cases, and one of them ended up being a rotablator. So, mental health and this equilibrium is very important, especially for us, for CTO PCI operators, because, physically you seem to be just standing here, rolling your fingers and moving your hands a bit, but it's all there. And 6-hour cases and these long cases with a lot of steps where you have to be careful every step is really draining. And you have to watch out for yourself and plan your vacations well as well. That's one thing that's very important, is to really make sure that, you don't do 4 months straight without 1 day of vacation, and that you balance these things out.
And then, do you have any favorite books or movie?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a big history fan. I love history. And, I had the pleasure to go to Greece with Dimitri a couple times. And I hope one day we will be able to revive this partnership with you. And, historically, Greece is just such a fantastic country. I mean, I'm fascinated by the layers of civilization as well. I'm Syrian, and I had the pleasure to, I was born there, but I never really lived up there. And I had the pleasure to go back there in 2009 before the war. And it's just so fascinating to see all these layers of civilization, one on top of the other. I remember in Damascus, I visited this place. Now it's a mosque, but before it was a Roman temple, and then it was a cathedral, and then it became a mosque. And you have these three layers of civilization in the same spot. And history really gets me going. I really love that subject. I love reading medical and non-medical books as well. One of my favorite books of all time is Le Comte de Monte Cristo, that I absolutely loved. It's just a story of patience and vengeance and love, and it's just a really great book that spontaneously come to mind. And I keep pretty active. We're very sportive. I have a dog and a cat, and we love to go running. And of course, I'm Mediterranean, so I love to see people. And I don't know if it's like that for you, but often growing up, there was always people at my house, the aunts, the cousins, the parents, and Mediterraneans, one of our hobbies is to interact with human beings. My wife is Canadian, so her hobby is like I go skiing, I go swimming, I go hockey. And then growing up, I was like, well, I don't know how to do any of these things. Like, what did I do growing up? Well, we had dinners and family and laugh. But this gives you good social skills later in life, and it allows a guy like you to do beautiful podcasts and to be good humanly and socially. So these are my hobbies: spend time with family and friends, reading, and being active.
And then when it comes to the things that you love to do in the future, you're most proud of, what are you most proud of, both personally and professionally?
To reach this position that I'm in right now, to be invited to international meetings, and, in the beginning, I felt I had a bit of an imposter syndrome. I'm like, what am I doing here? But with the time, I realized that I actually can contribute a little bit, and it's just, coming from a background, the typical story. Born in Syria, I came here where I was 5 years old. My parents didn't have much. They always instilled the importance of education and learning in me, and then to start from there and do my, schooling and graduate from med school, and then in cardiology, interventional cardiology. I mean, just my parents are very proud, obviously, and you know how it is in our communities. It's like everybody knows the son of this lady. So my parents, they get phone calls all the time. We see your son here, we see that. And just to see them being happy makes me happy and proud. And I try to help out a lot with my community, like Syrian, Lebanese. I still speak Arabic, even though I came here very young. So this helps me a lot in clinic. And I'm sure you have a lot of Greek patients. You know how it is. And it's sort of word to mouth, right? You treat one well and you're kind, and then it's just the whole community wants to come and see you and have an appointment. But it really makes me happy to treat, my community. And I do 1 day a month, I do sort of outreach, where I work as a general cardiologist for a lot of, Syrian refugees and people who had it hard during the war and stuff. And just when they hear you speak their language, because they come here to Canada, first of all, it's very cold. And second of all, a lot of them don't speak good French or English. So, and when they're sick and they come to the hospital and they don't understand, it's a very anxiety driven situation for them. So when they hear somebody speak Arabic, they're like, oh my God, like you see in their eyes, they're automatically relieved. So these are things that make me proud, that I can contribute to my community, that I, make my parents and my family proud as well. And I just love what I do. I genuinely feel that I'm doing exactly what I was born to do. I think this job and this career allows me to bring out the best of my personality traits. And when you love what you do, you don't see the time pass, you don't see the long hours, you just go at it and you feel blessed. So that's a bit my trajectory.
And Raja, if you had to give some advice to people based on what you've learned, what you've done, the people who are in your shoes, 6, 7, 8 years ago when you're starting to train, what would you advise them to do to follow your trajectory or find their own path towards a mastery in CTO and complex PCI?
Yeah. So my advice is, medicine is an art, okay? It's a human art. You can be very book smart and learn everything that's written in the book. If you don't develop your human skills, your communication skills, you could be the smartest doctor in the world. If your patient does not trust you, and he won't take the prescription or he won't do the intervention you're recommending. So that's my first advice is be a good human being. However you do it, just be a good human being. Listen more than you talk in the beginning. And the older and the wiser you go, then you could start talking a bit more and building your confidence. And be humble and patient with yourself and with others. I think this is the best advice I can give for somebody jumping into a CTO chip fellowship. It's a very humbling experience because as good as you think you are as an interventional cardiologist, once you penetrate that world, if you're not humble, you're not going to survive long. Let me tell you that. So humility, patience are the two advice that I would give for young CTO operators that are wanting to jump into that.
Wonderful. Well, Raja, again, that was amazing. I think these are great advice for everyone, including early or late career for that matter, how to get better, not only as CTO, but other things in life as well. So any final words of wisdom, and then we'll let you get on with your schedule.
Well, my final word is I want to thank you, Manos, because you're such a humble person. And you've been a model. You've done so much for the field. All your teachings, your books, your YouTube channel, your videos. I mean, you've contributed so much to this field, and you've done all that being the most humble human being. So you're an inspiration to me and to a lot of other people. And thank you as well for supporting the young generation. I know you keep us in the loop. You guys are still inviting us to meetings, and you're helping building our confidence up instead of just, you could be egotistic and be like, I'm the CTO king and I'm the legend. But you guys like you, Dimitri, Jeff, Ajay, Bill, and so many others, Stefan, have really supported my generation, which is the first CTO chip generation that are trained. And you've been helping us tremendously succeed. So I want to thank you as a final word.
No, I think we should thank you because, again, I think that there's only so many cases one can do. I think many people say that, and you need it takes a village, right? It takes many people to do this, and I loved your way of you say you pick up the best from everyone you meet, and you make the most, and you become the best you can be. So, thanks again, congratulations again, Raja. It's been phenomenal podcast, and thanks for everything and your help with the books and everything else, and so excited to keep on working with you.
Thank you so much, Manos.
Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.